Hey, it's Diana. Today I'm going to show you how to make homemade pizza. We're going to start with a scratch dough, and then we're going to add all of our favorite toppings to it. Just as any lesson, I'm going to get started by tying back my hair and washing my hands. I have my recipe printed out, ready to go. I have all my ingredients pulled, so we can just start adding things right into our mixer. We're going to start with 1 1/4 cup of warm water, 2 packages of dry yeast, 1 tablespoon of honey, and 3 tablespoons of olive oil, all going into the mixer to get our yeast activated with that warm water, and then we're going to add in our flour to that. I'm going to heat this water on the stove just a tiny bit until it reaches 100 to 105 degrees. We want to make sure we watch this with the thermometer because it's going to heat up really quickly. We don't want it to go too far. Any temperature above 105 is going to kill the yeast that we're going to use, so we want to just make sure that we stay below that temperature. When I take the temperature of the water, I want to make sure my thermometer probe does not hit the bottom because it's going to skyrocket our temperature. So just try to hover the end of that temperature probe in the water without touching the bottom. And they're already at 100, so I'm going to turn it off. I don't want it to go too far. So I have the distilled water that we heated on the stove. I'm just going to double check that temperature, make sure we're not over 105 degrees. Looks like we're right at about 104, so that's perfect. That's going into our mixing bowl. Next ingredient is 2 packages of dry yeast. So I had purchased bulk yeast, and I keep it in these bigger jars, and I just keep it in the freezer so it doesn't go bad. And I can just measure right out of here. Now I know that 2 1/4 teaspoons is equivalent to 1 package, and the recipe calls for 2 packages of dry yeast. So I'm going to go ahead and add 4 1/2 teaspoons. So there's 4 1/2. The rest of my yeast is going to go back into the freezer. Next, we're adding 1 tablespoon of honey. Now, it's not super critical that you have exactly 1 tablespoon here of honey, so I'm just going to eyeball it. It's about a 1 second. We're going to do 3 tablespoons of olive oil. I have some good quality extra virgin olive oil straight from Greece. 1, 2, 3. When you're estimating how much olive oil you have, about 1 second is usually about a tablespoon. So that's why I just count to 3 when I pour. All right, so that's what we need to activate our yeast. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on just a slow speed just to get it mixed together. What we're looking for in this first step is just to get all of the yeast lumps broken up. So it looks like we're not quite there. I'm going to let it go a little bit further. So we're ready to add our flour. The recipe calls for 3 1/4 to 3 1/2 cups of flour. I'm just going to add 3 cups to start, maybe slightly less than 3 cups. I don't want to go too far with it, otherwise our dough will be too firm. And I'm going to show you as we go along how to gauge how much flour you should add. So this measurement for this first part is not super important because we're just going to go off of how it looks and not by an exact measurement. So I'm going to go ahead and add 1 and 2 cups of flour to begin, and then we'll just get it spinning with our dough hook in there. So you can see with this dough, it almost looks like a cake batter, how it's still really runny and just flattening out. We want to definitely add more flour to this to make it start looking more like a dough. So I'm going to go ahead and add about another about a half cup here. We're going to let it spin, and then as we go, you're going to see me just adding spoonfuls of flour at a time until I start to see the dough really come together a little bit more and start looking like you would think of as a traditional bread dough, like something that was firm enough that could be kneaded with your hands. This dough is looking excellent right now. I just want to point out that you can see it sticking slightly to the bottom of the bowl, but not to the sides. That's exactly how we want the dough to look at this point of our dough making process. So this is the perfect time to go ahead and add those 2 teaspoons of salt. At this point, we want to just let our dough continue to knead in here for 10 more minutes. I should also point out that as you let your mixer run for 10 minutes, it's important to stand by it. You can see that I have my hand on the stand of the mixer here because this dough is getting pretty solid in there, so I don't want my mixer to run away and fall off the counter. So I'm just going to hang on to this as my dough continues to knead for that 10 minutes. We've come to the end of our 10 minutes of kneading the dough. So now we're going to pour it out onto the work surface, and I'm going to show you how to finish off this dough by hand. So it should be pretty soft and pliable. It should not be a hard lump of dough at this point. So see how mine is pretty stretchy. So I'm just going to release the bowl. Lock this mixer down so I can just move it back here out of our way. And then this dough, see how I kind of have to work it to get it out of the bowl? That's exactly the amount of slight stickiness that you want for this dough. So I'm just using short strokes to pull this dough out. And I want to get as much of it out of my bowl as possible. So we're done with this. I'm just going to set that down in the sink so I can wash it up later. Now this dough is looking beautiful right now. So I can push it in. It doesn't stick to my fingers when I pull my fingers back up. The dimples are popping up about halfway, and that's great. So we're going to knead this by hand about 10 to 20 times until we just finish off the dough. So kneading means using these heels of your hands to just push forward. Use your fingertips to pull back and fold. Turn it a quarter, push forward, lift and fold. Turn it a quarter, push, lift and fold. Turn it a quarter, push, lift and fold. That's how we knead the dough. So I'm just going to keep going until we get somewhere between 10 and 20 strokes. And then we're going to oil a bowl, set our dough in there, and we're going to let it rise for 30 minutes. Within that 30-minute time frame, the dough should double in size. It should puff up, get a lot of air developed inside. That's going to make for a really nice chewy crust when we get our pizza cooked. All right. So our dough is looking beautiful. It's holding our shape fairly well, but it is still soft enough to relax. It's exactly how we want it. So to oil our bowl, I'm going to take that good quality olive oil that we have again, just an empty, smooth bowl. I'm just going to drizzle a little bit onto the sides. You can use your hand and just smear it so you get some of that oil on every surface in here, because your dough is going to expand and you don't want your dough to stick to a part of the bowl that doesn't have any oil on it. So go ahead and just smooth that oil out. So you pull your dough back, make sure that all of it's just releasing from the counter. If it's not releasing, if it's too sticky, add just a tiny bit of flour to your work surface. Roll the dough ball in there to get it to release. And there we go. So I'm going to drop that in there. And I'm going to do a little flip trick here. So I'm just going to toss it so my dough flipped over, because I want both sides of my dough ball to get oiled. So I'm going to just place this cover on. I'm going to stick this in my oven that's not on at the moment. It's just a nice draft-free, warm place that this dough can sit undisturbed for 30 minutes as it does its work to double in size. As our dough is doubling up in that undisturbed location right here in this oven that's not on, there's no heat in there, let's work on our toppings. So let's not waste this time. Let's get all of our toppings prepped, so as soon as our dough is ready, we can just make up our pizzas and get them in the oven. Of course, whenever you think of pizza, you think of cheese, right? So let's talk about cheese. This is shredded mozzarella, just store-bought, pre-shredded, works awesome for pizza. This one is a fresh mozzarella log. You can find this brand at like any grocery store. This one just happens to be pre-sliced, which I like. It just is one more step that I don't have to do while I'm making pizza. So this is a great option. Also, shreds. But what goes underneath that cheese? Let's talk about sauce. One is just marinara sauce. This is just some marinara sauce that I made actually this summer from tomatoes that were in our garden. It's just tomatoes, garlic, basil, and onions that had simmered, and I blended all together. So we can use this as a pizza sauce, which I'll show you. The other alternative is, if you ever think of a classic Mediterranean white pizza, it's going to be just garlic and herb infused olive oil. So I'm going to show you how to make that right now, and then we'll come back and prep the rest of our toppings. All we need to get garlic and herb infused olive oil is a small saute pan, that good quality olive oil, cloves of garlic that are peeled. Just gonna throw a couple of those down into our saute pan. Get some of our olive oil in there. And I'm gonna pick the herbs that I want. And I think today I want some thyme and rosemary. Just a little pinch of that. And then some dried rosemary as well. You can absolutely use fresh herbs for this part. I just don't happen to have any fresh herbs on hand today. So dried will work just as well. And I'm just gonna get some very low heat underneath. We're just gonna let this work for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have some delicious herb and garlic infused olive oil to use as an alternate for red sauce on top of our pizzas. For my toppings on this pizza, I want to do some red diced bell pepper, mushrooms, and pepperoni. So I'm going to show you how to prep these ingredients to put on top of your pizza. So I have half of a red bell pepper diced here already. I'm just going to show you quick how I do that with the other half. So I'm just going to use my hand to pull these seeds out, set those off to the side, pull these white ribs out, shake it down if there's any stray seeds left inside there. So remember, whenever we're wanting to turn anything into squares, we're gonna first cut into sticks and then we're gonna cut into squares. So using your knife, demonstrating good knife skills and knife safety, I'm gonna claw my hand that's holding the food, and then this hand with the knife is gonna practice the wave. So I'm gonna push forward, I'm gonna pull back, and my knife tip should stay on or pretty close to the cutting board the entire time. So I'm not waving my knife around like that and creating any dangerous situations. Notice that my hand is always going to have those fingertips tucked under and that claw configuration on the other side. So I'm just going to slice this and see how this last piece is kind of weird. I'm just going to go ahead and cut that in half. Cut that, and then it's a little too wide for the dice size that I want. So I'm just gonna put a little claw here, push forward, and there we go. I have that the right size. When you're practicing good knife skills, it's more important to be safe than it is to be fast. You don't need to cut things fast. You just need to make sure that you are protecting your fingers. So now that I have these into sticks, I wanna go into squares to make it match this dice. So I'm just gonna move half of these off to the side. Working with all of it seems like a little bit too much for my hand to manage. So I'm just gonna pile it into a smaller pile that I can manage. I'm gonna claw my hands on my left, tuck those fingertips underneath. I'm gonna use that wave rocking motion with my knife as I push forward. Let the blade do its job. Notice I'm not just coming and going a straight down chop and a straight down chop. It's not very controlled. So I wanna just make sure that the tip of my knife stays down on the cutting board, and I'm just using that nice, smooth, rocking motion. It does not have to be fast. Okay, I'm just going to slide those off to the side. Notice that when I slide things with my knife, I just flip it over and use the back side, the dull side. I don't want to drag my sharp side on the cutting board because that's just going to make it dull. So it's okay to use your knife to do that. Just use the back side that's not sharp. And then here we go. I'm going to just dice the other half of my julienne cut bell pepper. All right, that looks lovely. Scoop those off to the side. Now let's talk about mushrooms. So for mushrooms, you'll notice that when you pull them out of a box that they have little pieces of dirt on it, which is totally fine. These come from the earth. You'd expect them to have dirt on them. So instead of submerging mushrooms under water, running water or still water, you want to just use a clean, damp cloth to wipe them off. So to do that, you're just going to push in slightly and rub around the bottom of the cap here. Then you're going to pull downward with the towel over the stem. You're going to wipe the base. And then one final wipe across the top of the cap, and your mushroom is all set to go. It's up to you to decide if you like your mushroom in slices or dice. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you both. First, we're gonna start with the slice. So I'm just going to take my knife again, practicing that slow stroke, letting my knife go forward. Once I get a little too close to this side, I'm not really comfortable holding it like that anymore. So go ahead and just tip it down on its side, and you can continue to slice it this way. So that's what sliced mushrooms are going to look like. If you want to go ahead and dice those, pile them up. You're going to cut them one way. And then you're just going to take this whole pile, you're going to turn it this way and cut those sticks into diced squares. So practice your claw, use nice strokes in the wave motion with your knife. Push forward, let the long edge of your knife do its work, and get your diced mushrooms. So let's check in on our garlic olive oil over here on the stove. You can see the tiny bubbles around the edge of the garlic. That's exactly what we want. It's not at a simmer, it's just browning the garlic, not burning it. That's exactly what's going to give us that nice garlic infusion in our olive oil without any burnt taste at all. It's been about 30 minutes since we started proofing our dough, so I'm going to pull that out, and I'm super excited to show you what it looks like. Pull that cover off and see. Yes. Okay. So if you can see in here, our dough has puffed up to about double the size it was when we put it in. That's exactly where we want to be. So let's get this dough turned out and start making our pizzas. Now this dough, if you use it as one big piece, it would make a giant pizza. So I'm going to cut this into 4 pieces so I can make a pizza for myself, I can make a pizza for my husband, and I'm going to make 2 pizzas for the kids to split because everybody likes different toppings. Everybody wants to make it their own. I'm just going to show you how I make pizzas for my entire family of one batch of dough. Right now, before we start getting our dough cut up and putting our toppings on, it's a really good time to preheat your oven. So get that turned on to 500 degrees. Right now you see me just prepping 3 sheet pans with silicone mats. So I'm just laying these nonstick mats into the sheets. I'm going to cook the pizzas on these so they don't get glued down to the cookie sheets as they bake. So keep those off to the side while we prep our dough. So I'm just going to turn this dough out. Lovely how it all just pours out into one piece. We're all done with this bowl. We can go over to the sink. I'm just going to use my pastry cutter. You can just use a regular knife. I'm going to cut this into 4 parts. Equal on this side, and I'm actually going to make my pizza a little bit smaller. I'm going to make the other one for the kids a little bit bigger. There we go. That one's going to be mine. Kids, husband's pizza. There we go. I'm going to roll it into a ball. That's going to help me form a round pizza. And then you're just going to go ahead and start pulling it out. I don't get fancy like the people that you see in movies tossing pizza doughs up into the air. I'm not that talented. So I just use small strokes, go around the edges, and just pull out and to the sides as I turn this dough. So I want to try to make it as even as I can without any thin spots or thick spots in the dough. And as your dough gets bigger, you'll kind of notice where those come out. So just move your fingers around. Try to get into those thick areas. Stretch them out a little bit so you can make them a little bit more even. The more even your crust is, the more even it's going to bake and the more consistent bites you'll have. So go ahead then and just lay that out onto your sheet. So you can see that's a pretty big pizza for one person, and this is like on the small side of what I cut. So you'll be able to get an idea of what these bigger doughs are going to look like. So I'm going to use that garlic infused olive oil for my sauce. And then I'm going to show you a different pizza that's going to use the red sauce. I'm just going to use this silicone brush to dip it in, brush it lightly onto this pizza dough. I don't need gobs of it, just a little bit, enough to add flavor and a little bit of moisture to this pizza. I don't want it to dry out too much when it bakes in the oven. There we go. That's just going to be my sauce. I'm not having red sauce on mine. Then I'm going to go peppers. I like a lot of veggies on my pizza, so I'm going to load it up. I'm going to go mushrooms. And then I'm going to do cheese. Now, this shredded mozzarella is great. It'll melt really nicely. I'm going to put a little bit of that. I'm also going to do some of the fresh mozzarella because I love the creaminess of fresh mozzarella. So I'm going to show you how we prep that. I'm going to pull just a few slices out the end of the log. You can see these are pre-sliced, which just saves me one cut that I have to do. So I'm going to just dice this. My goal right here is not to have them perfect, but just to make them smaller pieces so I can spread them evenly on the pizza. So I did some sticks. I'm going to turn to the side. I'm going to do the squares. There we go. So now we just have nice little cubes that can sprinkle easily onto the pizza. I'm just going to sprinkle these on top. It's just going to layer right on top with the shredded. And I'm going to add these pepperonis. You don't have to add a ton of pepperoni for your pizza to have a lot of flavor. I'm just going to add a few in the circle, leave some space in between them. Awesome. And then I'm going to put the rest of my mozzarella right on top. So if you're only using one kind of mozzarella, you can just lay all your toppings down first and then put all of the cheese on top. That totally works. The key is just to have some cheese on top so the toppings that are up here don't get burned. There we go. Pizza number one done. This is going to go into the oven at 500 degrees for usually about 12 minutes total, but I set the timer for 10 minutes. Check it at that time just to make sure it's not too far along. And then I'll go ahead and add an extra minute or add 2 minutes, just depending on how the crust is looking. We want the crust to be nice and golden brown, but not burnt. While we wait for that oven to heat up, I'm going to prep the other pizzas. This one's going to be a red sauce cheese pizza for my kiddos. Straight up cheese pizza, that's their favorite. Look at how giant that pizza is. We're going to do one giant, delicious cheese pizza. So here we go with some red sauce for them. And the key to doing a great red sauce on top of your pizza is to put just a little bit of it. You don't want gobs and gobs of sauce on your pizza. You just want a little bit. Spread it out with the back of the spoon. Just kind of push it around. You only need a small spattering of it. If you load on spoonfuls of this sauce and you have it kind of cooling, your pizza is going to be really mushy and watery. So just keep it light. Less is more here. Just a little bit for the flavor is all you need. And I try to go close to the edge as I can because I don't want those edges to really burn. And I like putting the cheese all the way to the edge of the pizza. So they also just like a mixture of the shredded and fresh. So that's what I'm going to do for them. My goal here is not to have to make these uniform. I just want to get them cut down into squares so I can spread them out on top of the pizza. How fun is that? All right. So now's a really great time to clean up your kitchen while those first pizzas are in the oven, and you have that 10 minutes to get yourself reorganized for the next phase, which is taking those pizzas out, letting them cool, cutting them, and then serving them up for your hungry crew. So what I'm doing with my ingredients is I put all my diced bell peppers in this little container. I'm going to save them for when I make salads later on this week. That's going to be super easy to just go ahead and sprinkle them right on because they're already washed and cut. The yeast is going to go back in the freezer. These mushrooms, I sliced a couple of them that I can saute and just have as a side dish too, and also wipe the rest of them. I can slice them and have them ready for salads later on too. I can slice them and have them ready to saute for another meal, put them in an airtight container. Those are going to go back in the refrigerator. And then, of course, we're going to wash the dishes. So what to do with the rest of that garlic-infused olive oil? Do not throw it away. You are going to use that later on in the week. You can use it to top a salad. It's going to make the start of a really great salad dressing. If you're going to make more pizzas later, you already have that ready. You can use this olive oil anywhere you would use just straight olive oil out of the bottle. So if you're making pasta, you can use this to top your pasta as that great finishing oil. It's going to have all those lovely flavors in there. So for sure, don't throw it away. Save it in a little glass jar. Pop that in the refrigerator. It's going to be ready to go as soon as you need it. Our timer's ringing on our pizza, so I wanted to show you what it's going to look like. Ta-da! All right, I put 2 pizzas in there. That looks pretty perfect to me. The top, also pretty perfect. So I'm gonna get those out of the oven and sliced up for the family. You can hear them, they're hungry. There's the finished pizza. This pizza's gotta come off of the silicone mat before we cut it because the pizza cutter is gonna go right through that mat. So you wanna just put that onto a cutting board first. I personally like to take up some of this grease just to make the eating experience a little bit nicer. So I'm just gonna use a clean paper towel, just lay it on top, move it around, take some of that grease up. So that's it for our pizza lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that your pizza is just as delicious as the ones that we're making. We got 2 minutes left and then our pizzas are coming out. So we're gonna go eat.